Good morning. Although the majority of the people sitting on this table and in the room are speaking Dutch, nevertheless, the whole seminar is in English. Close, okay. So, as I said, the whole seminar is in English, notwithstanding the fact that only those who will be available online, the majority of the people speaking here are speaking in Dutch. But we are not going to enter into a debate about the language to be used at university courses. That's not actually the object of the Panathlon Association. I'm Philip Vlaming. I'm the president of the Panathlon Brussels EU Club, which is a club belonging to the Panathlon organization, but dedicated precisely to the issues, the debate about sport and the European Union. And we are glad, of course, that we have experts from the European Commission participating today, because we believe that sport belongs to the values that within the European Union we need to protect, we need also to promote. And therefore, this seminar today is a very valuable momentum, because presenting the book of Professor Yves van der Nouwele is something exceptional. It means, I think, that the whole Panathlon community, but not only the Panathlon community, considers that he has such a wealth of knowledge, such a wealth of experience, that we are really honored and glad that we are entitled to have that knowledge on paper, and that we can share it, and that we can discuss it. And that's belonging to the purposes of Panathlon, mixing the values of sport with the questions on integrity, with also the discussion on the scientific background. And doing that in a context that is the purpose of Panathlon Brussels EU, doing that in the context where also the European institutions can be involved. I'm happy of all of you being here and attending this event, and having said that, Yves, I would be very happy that you take over the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip, for these flattering words. Thanks also to Panathlon International, EU Brussels, and specifically to the organizer of today's event, Paul Standaard. Hartelijk welkom. Bienvenue à tous. Herzlich willkommen, the three languages of Belgium. Welcome to all who attend this meeting, either physically or via live streaming. The present book, Joy and Pain, Disillusion and Sadness, but also Hope and Optimism, is my personal view on today's sport. My personal view on abuses, on the challenges, but also on the positive possibilities as I have researched and recorded them since the 80s. The whole spectrum of positive and negative emotions associated with sport may appear as an overused cliché. Sport is emotion. Actually, it reflects my perspective on a sport psychologist, which implies being interested in the impact of current sport practices on the welfare and well-being of all actors in sport. As you get older, you don't necessarily get wiser, but you certainly have more to look back on than as you are 20-something, even in my case, more than 60-something. This book is the result of both my counseling work and research in my 40 years long journey in sport. This description gives insight into my personal history and my motivation to write this book. In the 80s, my research and counseling has been mainly focused on performance enhancement, to enhance the motivation and concentration at moments of stress, managing their fear of failure of the athletes, help them to deal with mistakes and disappointments. I shared their joys, their struggles, and their disappointments in the 80s. In the 90s, my interest focused mainly on the impact of sport and exercise on the welfare of middle-aged adults and elderly, on their motivation or lack on motivation, on their struggle with unhealthy sedentary habits. And then from the turn of the century, my counseling and research focused on sexual abuse and by extension on all ethical violations and misconduct in sport, but also on how to mobilize the positive potentials of sport. I was able to actualize the latter specifically through my involvement in a 12-year-long sports and development project in South Africa. An abused young athlete of 12 years old prompted me in the year 2000 to refocus my research on sexual abuse and on the psychological impact of poor morality in sport. I conducted research on sexual abuse in Flanders, and I explored potential avenues for correction. Therefore, I contacted a lot of colleagues from various disciplines, economists, philosophers, sociologists, and sport managers, working in the same area of interest. And I published with them several books on that. From 22 to 2014, I got involved in a large developmental project in South Africa named Dynamics of Building a Better Society. Our sub-project was named Unlocking the Potential of Sport and Physical Activity for Youth Wellness and Development. This project used sport as a tool in the pursuit of broader social goals. In fact, sport is increasingly seen as a cheap and very efficient means to support more basic programs, not only in developing countries, but also in war zones, refugee camps, and as far as Western countries are concerned, as a means to facilitate the integration of underprivileged people and migrants. The rationale behind it is that life disrupted by poverty, war, disasters, or by cultural identity uncertainty, sport can help break the sense of helplessness, can provide a safe context, and can provide or restore a sense of control and normalcy. Our challenge in South Africa was to unlock this positive potential of sport and to develop reasonable criteria for a good delivery of sport. I am proud to say that we managed at the end of the project to create a university master's program in sport for development. And the live streaming, I have seen that my colleagues from South Africa are also following this meeting. My approach includes both counseling and research. Actually, it's a bit strange maybe that I have to explain why my approach was also academic. I have two reasons to emphasize that I also included research. Firstly, it's my opinion that too few questions are asked about the impact of current practices in sport. Laying cards differently, asking new questions that can give new insights, that is what scientists do, isn't it? The second reason to emphasize that my approach is academic is that I am fully aware of the limited importance of the academic approach, at least as a trigger for change. The emotions aroused by match fixing scandals and by the testimonies of sexual abuse have triggered more emotions than my research at the time. Research data obviously do not arouse emotions and get little attention. People don't see the personal stories and tragedies and the loss of human dignity behind figures and analysis. This awareness of the limitations of my academic work motivated me to get involved in Panathlon International, an organization having as objective more ethics in sport. However, it is not to say that research is unnecessary. I am only saying that objective data usually do become important, mostly once the decision is made to address the problem, not to trigger the decision. So I have asked myself questions to sport, and some of my questions at the time, I projected this here now. For example, what is the long-term impact of sexual and psychological abuse, of violence and racism in sport? To what extent does one tolerate fraud, corruption, match fixing, and abuse of power in sport? Don't the media focus too much on emotions and drama for the sake of the ratings? Are sports journalists critical enough? Is there sufficient visibility and control of the commercialization of the money flows in sport? Do we realize how much an excessive commercialization of sports affects the behavior and integrity of young athletes? In fact, of all main actors in sport. And then what's the impact of mega sport events such as we had in Qatar on the socio-economic context of the organizing country and its population? And maybe provocative, a bit provocative, who actually controls these global sport organizations on that level? Who guards the guards? Here I have some overview of the chapters of my book. And in these various chapters I listed the most striking abuses in sport and the human damage they cause. The predominant sport-specific challenges, but also some avenues to ensure well-being in the physically and mentally demanding context of top-level sport. In my opinion, the picture of today's sport is far from flattering. Even for the layman, it is crystal clear that the scale and the diversity of incidents show how sportsmanship and the Olympic values have been gradually degraded. It is clear that we are dealing in sport with a wide variety of behaviors that are in conflict with an equally wide variety of values, standards, sport rules, ethical precepts, even in conflict with human and civil rights. There is no doubt whatsoever that limits are being overstepped when trainers abuse young athletes, or when matches are fixed, or trainers, even referees, are bribed. An English expression says, you have to call a spade a spade. You cannot condone those practices. However, we mustn't underestimate the importance of the many non-criminal but nevertheless inappropriate and poor practices either. I mean here shouting hateful racist remarks from the sidelines, cheating, being aggressive or intolerant, and putting undue pressure on young athletes for egocentric reasons. When I denounced abuses and malpractices, I referred also to their breeding grounds. I consider match fixing, corruption, excessive dependence on big money, and not isolated incidents, but negative side effects of the uncontrolled globalization and commercialization of sport. How else can you understand the lack of financial transparency in sport management, the lack of transparency in the tenders and contracts in the organization of mega sport events, the apparent indifference to the negative side effects of the event on the organizing country and its population? How else can you understand the perverse salaries and transfer fees in top-level football. The dark money, the dirty money even in amateur sport. The dubious practices of sport agents, the brokers. The disgraceful human trafficking of young African footballers. The fact that too many clubs are kept alive by foreign owners, not the least from Qatar oil sheikhs and Russian oligarchs, and in some cases, for God's sake, even betting companies. It's hard to believe that these transgressions could only be brought to light by the testimonies of victims or by law enforcement or by tax auditors. The signs had long been visible, I think. So that's why I tend to assume that most insiders in sport are torn by a moral dilemma. When do you see too many things that you think they are not kosher, what should you do? At what point do you decide to denounce something? When do you draw a line in the sand? When is enough enough? Anyway, better late than never, not so much to punish a few so-called rotten apples, but above all to identify and manage the breeding grounds for the clear aberrations that have been exposed. When you criticize something, as I do, a justified response is, what do you suggest for yourself? You cannot leave what or who you criticize with the chunks, without at least giving a direction as to how you see it yourself. Well, with regard to corrective measures, I noted that at first sight, unambiguous problems are very complex and consist of many diverse sub-problems. Therefore, in my opinion, a sustainable and realistic approach cannot consist of a series of separate crisis interventions, but must be structural and comprehensive. It seems to me more effective to develop a comprehensive integrity management strategy rather than implementing a series of ad hoc solutions. Moreover, and I'm very aware of that you cannot escape the fact that when causes of some problems are global and international, when major interests are at stake, solutions should also to be sought at that global international level. When big money, big interest and power are at stake, we are no longer talking about improvements, but about changes with global, social, geopolitical and financial consequences. Anyway, my indignation and sadness do not make me cynical. As a counterbalance, I also pointed to the positive potentials of sport and exercise and to an increasing number of excellent initiatives. I still think that what sport gives us is much more valuable than what it takes away from us. Sport is so important in our society that we must continue to believe in its power and its benefits. If you would have gained the impression that I am so arrogant as to think that I have found the ultimate solution on my own, I must say that I am keenly aware of the relativity of my approach and my insights, and of the complexity of the challenges facing sport. I would like to define my stance and to conclude my presentation paraphrasing the quote of a Belgian philosopher van Berghem. Of course, I am convinced of what I say and have written, but I consider that there may be flaws in my argumentation and approach, and that someone can point it out to me. This, however, does not impede my commitment. On the basis of what I know today, I act, and I am also prepared to take or to face the consequences. This is why I think that silence must be broken here, and that a continuous questioning of sport inside sport is a must. That discussing and mapping the problems must be the first step anyway to address the problems properly. If one doesn't see that one is wrong or what is wrong, one will not be inclined, of course, to change either. I covered so many issues in my book that it would be impossible to present them here all today in detail. But if I have succeeded to interest you, feel free to buy a copy next door of outside. Yeah. My editor is here and with enough copies to serve you. Anyway, as our program shows, I wish my book presentation to be the start of what I myself have recommended, critical questioning and debate from various perspectives. Many thanks in advance for the distinguished international expert who accepted to participate in the debate. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you, Yves, for this excellent presentation. I will now give the floor to Patrick van Kampenhout. He should have taken the floor first, but you know, the agenda was not in front of me. So Patrick, you have the floor, please.
So, good morning or good noon, everyone. And I would say a big welcome also to our distinguished guests. So, Madame Floor van Hout, head of the sport unit by the European Commission. And Madame Marianne Olvers, voor de professor recht aan de Vrije Universiteit van Amsterdam. Mr. Watson, partner CIS for Sport Consulting Agency. Severin Moritzer, who is online, and who is the CEO of the Fair Play Code. Ruben Nijssen, elite sport manager at Belgium Gymnastics. And Philippe Vlaming, who is the president of the Panathlon EU Brussels, and also EU expert on sport lotteries. Mr. Jacques Blondin, head of the regularity enforcement at FIFA. And we have Paul Standaert, who is the president of the Panathlon International Belgium. I represent here our president of the Panathlon International, Pierre Zappelli, and I would like to have a little word to you and Yves. As a board member of the Belgian Olympic Committee, I can say that Panathlon International Belgium just existed not so long time ago, and we are recognized by the Belgian Olympic Committee. Yves van den Ouwelen, today an honorary professor at the prestigious University of Leuven, is a man of culture and conviction. Always inquisitive and inventive, he found a subject of study that fascinates him almost a quarter of a century ago. The place of sport is society. its psychological as well as physiological implications, its benefits, but also the dangers that threaten it. Passionate about ethics and convinced of the need for fair play sport, he naturally joined Panathlon International, a movement that for over 70 years has been active throughout the world. In the field with its 270 clubs in 27 countries, as well as from its headquarters in Rapallo and its international offices in Brussels and Lausanne. He has established collaborative relations with the main institutional leaders of sport for the dissemination of ethical value in sport. Yves van den Ouwelen espoused the ideal of Panathlon International, a movement he joined 23 years ago. Through his writings, his reflections, his participations in various events organized by Panathlon International, he has greatly contributed to increase its prestige. It is relatively easy to identify the threats that are permanently hanging over sport and athletes, and which are calling doping, corruption, racism, fraud, and various kinds. Much more delicate is the research of the causes and those threats. This is what Yves van den Ouwelen does in his dense essay, full of examples and rich in reflections. He starts from the observation that the moral conscience of sport is declining. This is obvious, but it is not enough to deplore it. It is necessary to question the reason to the decline, which the author of the essay does. He sees four systemic sources of danger: the globalization of sport organization, the increasing commercialization of sports, the gigantic of large-scale sports events, and finally, the absence of public debate on those themes. The globalization and commercialization of sports on a worldwide scale have dramatically increased its economic and political importance, but have also affected the moral conduct of its stakeholders, both athletes and political and sport leaders. The author notes the negative effects of the pursuit of profits at the expense of the reflex on ethical values. He deplores the lack of high-level debate on those issues, while recalling the positive efforts made by European authorities in their European sport model, which he hopes will serve as an example for sport worldwide. We can add, in this respect, the recent adoption by the Council of Ministers of the Council of Europe of the European Sport Charter, in which the part of ethics has increased considerably. The author rightly cits the International Olympic Committee, a central figure for world sport. IOC Code of Ethics underlines the importance of respecting the rules of good conduct applicable to all Olympic parties. He concludes with a touch of optimism. Confident in the potential of the positive values of sport, he believes in the will to bring about sustainable change and proposes to develop an integrity management policy including good governance, equity, and corporate social responsibility in order to defend the fundamental characteristics of sports against any attempt to weaken them. On behalf of Panathlon International, I would like to thank Yves van den Ouwelen very much for this valuable analysis. Panathlon International sees it as a source of inspiration and will do its utmost to bring its full contribution to the debate that takes place. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick, for this quite impressive statement, which I believe is only telling a small thing of all the benefits that we get from the work of Yves. Having said this, now my dear friend Walter, I give you the floor. You have the real task to moderate actually the debate following this presentations.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Walter Watson. Um, First of all, I would like to thank Panathlon. I would like to thank Yves, Philip, and where is it? For the invitation that I was able to start a debate based upon his discussion. My biggest wish would be, and I think it's the same to you, my biggest wish would be that this debate would be the start of a real big debate globally all over the world for many, many years with a positive end at the end. First of all, with great interest and with great recognition, I have read the book from Yves. And I read it from a couple of different perspectives. First of all, from the lottery perspective. I've been working in the lottery business for many, many years, 35 years to be exact. Responsible for instance, sports betting, which is very much involved in the ethics of sports, because it is connected to sports, and there is a big danger if you offer sports betting in a very different way. The second perspective I read the book is from my membership of the Integrity Committee of the Royal Dutch Football Association, the KNVB. Because stepping out of the lottery where I worked, I was confronted from another perspective with items like match fixing. But also from the perspective as a youth trainer for many years in my own hometown, where I was confronted with very young kids. And my main goal in the beginning was to give them fun in football, to give them fun in sports. But at the same time, I was confronted with parents who were very eager to put them on a higher level. They asked a lot of these kids. The second priority in this training was techniques, and the last one was results. But the parents wanted to put it in a different way. And that made it very difficult. Because, for instance, the scouting of professional football clubs, they are scouting these kids from a very young age. And I warned them, please be realistic about your own situation. If you go to such a big club, you can be disappointed at a young age. And I've seen many examples in this case that the young kids came back after 1 year, didn't make it at the professional football club, and suddenly after a couple of months they stopped with football playing. That can't be the issue of the whole trainers. But also from a practitioner perspective, as a very more cyclist. I like to climb mountains with my cycling. Do I take something to get a better result, to get higher into the mountains, or do I put it in just a regular way, just the normal things you take? This is what much is good described in this book. But most of all, as a fan, as a lover of sports, if I'm looking at sports, what do I see? Do I see a fair sports? Do I see fair competition? Or do I see other things which might show up? So this recognition with all these kind of topics gave me the question, how and why do we accept lots of negative aspects in this case? So therefore I'm very much honored that I was asked to have a to moderate the debate on this topic. And in this book from Yves, we can discuss for many hours, maybe many days, because there are so many different topics that we can touch today. But as we discussed this in the preparation of this debate, let's go first of all to a higher level. How can we close the gap between the theory you have always brought up in your researches and at the end the practice? How can we close the gap with a approach which is comprehensive instead of what you already said before, rather than ad hoc solutions on a row, on a row, on a row. I maybe might refer to the example Yves gave about one research about sexual abuse. After his research, it became very silent for about 20 years, if I'm correct, and suddenly a case came up. And then the whole media began to talk with it, and then suddenly some measurements were taken. And this is what we have to discuss today. How can we close this gap to a much quicker and more workable situation for each kind of problem? And maybe that is utopia, but let's at least try to do it. I would like to end up after this discussion with a central common message what we can send out into the world, where we can build on, and maybe to map a couple of bullet points to underline this message. So therefore, I'm happy that we have a very good group of experts together today in this debate. First of all, you see two participants of this debate online. Unfortunately, there are strikes and other big problems why they can't be here today. They should be here today. That makes that we also have a little bit to improvise, because there, well, you can hear my echo, but the techniques is not helping us 100%. So there might be a delay for the ones who are online. If I ask a question, let's look what the delay is. Otherwise, we have to find some kind of solution that we can do it in a better way. But let me first introduce all the members of the debate. First of all, Jacques Blondin. Jacques Blondin is the head of regulatory enforcement at FIFA. The regulatory enforcement department investigates and manages compliance with sporting regulations relating to the football transfer system. It also provides sports legal and governance support to internal and external stakeholders. Jacques has worked as legal intern at Zen Ferrero Sport and Entertainment, and is currently also a member of the FIA's anti-doping hearing panel. He studied sport law and is a doctor of law from universities in Spain and Italy. Ruben Nijens. Ruben Nijens is technical director top sports of the Flemish Gymnastic Federation. Together with the top sport employees and the coaches, he is the driving force behind GymVet's top sports policy. In addition, he is responsible for the implementation and coordination of top sport activities, and he forms the internal and external point for everything that concerns top sport. In addition to this role as top sport manager, Ruben strengthens the GymVet management team. Coming from the tennis sport, he has had several roles, from trainer to manager at the Royal Dutch Lawn Tennis Federation and the Tennis Vlaanderen. Then, Floor van Hout. Floor van Hout works in the European Commission since more than 25 years. He is currently active as head of unit in charge of sports policy. Prior to this, she worked on several EU policies, including youth, maritime affairs, entrepreneurship and research. Originally from the Netherlands, she studied law and European studies in the Netherlands, Spain and Belgium before moving to Brussels to start her career in European policy. Then Marjan Olvers. Marjan Olvers is a professor at the Vrije University Amsterdam and is also co-director and researcher of Verinorm, a research company in the field of integrity and social safety. Marjan has been dealing with integrity issues for decades. She has an advisor for the Dutch government, and lectures on topics such as governance issues and integrity. She studied criminal law, private law, and European law at the Vrije Universiteit in Amsterdam, and previously worked as head of competition and procurement for the Ministry of Economic Affairs in the Netherlands. She obtained her PhD in competition law and advises international bodies on integrity and governance issues. And then the last one, Severin Moritzer. He is a national and international expert in the field of integrity in sports. He is the CEO of Play Fair Code, an Austrian-based association for protecting the integrity in sports. In his function, he deals with prevention, information training, know-how transfer, the adoption and creation of best practical models, as well as awareness-raising programs. He has been the UEFA Communications Coordinator for McDonald's Austria, head of TV funding at Vienna Film Fund, and since 2012 he is the CEO of Play Fair Code. He studied media management and sports law and is currently busy with a dissertation in the field of match fixing at the Vienna University Law, the Vienna University Law, the law faculty. Sorry for that. Okay. Well, I talked before about the gap between theory and the practice, and I would like to ask each panel member if he or she has experienced this gap, and can you give an example of this gap? Can I start with Ruben?
Good morning, everyone. A gap is maybe the wrong word, but of course, in theory, you can read a lot about this topic. But it's important to also see it in practice, because when you only see the theory but you don't see the practice, it's difficult to judge, to have a clear idea. So in my opinion, it's important to have both. I'm working more on the practical side, of course, with the athletes and the coaches and also the staff around them. Very important in this topic, what can be different items, is the mindset and the culture. For example, to ask questions. For example, in some sports, it's really normal to have a debate or a question between athlete and coach. In some sports, it's less that culture. It's not there yet. But that's one of the things you can see. Like, okay, in theory, you have to discuss a lot, but are they doing this in practice in two-way direction? A coach asking questions to an athlete, is this okay, or what do you think, what you want to improve? But also the other way around, from an athlete who's not afraid to ask questions, but also has this level of skill. Because when I see young athletes, not sure they're already ready, aware to ask questions. They also have to learn it step by step, and that's not an easy thing. And then it's nice to see this in theory, like, okay, you have to debate and discuss, but in practice it's really a long-term development. I'm not saying we don't have to be aware of this, but it's also not it's not like an aspirin, like fixed in 1 minute. It takes a long journey. That's for me the first one on theory and practical. Sometimes difference is the wrong word, but there is sometimes a gap.
Do you think this difference, can you cope with this difference, or is there a way you want to give back to the theory?
Not really. I'm not sure if I understand the question right. For me, it's important sometimes that you have the mix. When someone does a study, that also when they do a study to make a theory, that the questionnaire of the connection with the reality, the practice is also the real deal. Because a lot of when we do a questionnaire with athletes and coaches, they also sometimes give the right answer, but is it the answer that's really the reality? Because a lot of people want to give a nice answer instead of the reality. Sometimes I think also there is maybe a gap between the theoretical point of view and the practice in real time.
Thank you. Floor. For you, it's maybe not from a really practice sports perspective, but more on the policy level. Do you see a big difference between theory and practice again?
Thank you for indeed clarifying, because of course as a European policymaker we very much have a helicopter view, so we see a lot of things happening both from a political perspective or from policymakers, but also from sport federations in different countries. But this is not necessarily always easy to reach out to the grassroots and see the testimonies there. So it's very important to build those bridges to make sure that when policy and political decisions are made, that we actually do have evidence and we who have grounds for what is happening. So we have different ways of ensuring this. So first of all, we do studies. A couple of years ago, we did a big study on safe sport, and following that, we have also worked for a couple of years with the Council of Europe, with our counterparts there in the sports division, on analyzing further what this means in practice. So these are for us the ways to actually understand what happens on the ground. And another very important, and I think Panathlon knows this as well, is working to Erasmus Plus, which is maybe more known for the student mobility, but it also offers exchange of experience and cooperation in sport. And integrity is one of the 4 priorities for many years that allow us also to fund projects, and through those projects also understand what happens on the ground. So this, for us, are ways to organize that information and structure it and feed it back to decision makers. Now, what is maybe interesting and important, especially when it comes to these topics, which maybe not necessarily, and that's I think also your question, why there may be a gap, is that it's not easy topics to talk about. And sometimes this is interesting when we look at figures, for instance, from different countries to our work with the Council of Europe and some Erasmus projects, that in some countries the topic has become an issue and is being addressed, and there is more issues coming on the table. And of course then you have to question yourself, is it being addressed because there is a problem, or are problems that are below the surface being put on the table because it's being addressed? So this, of course, we need a lot of caution when we try to process and analyze those, not to jump into conclusions about any gaps, because the gap in a way will also widen if you look at it from a certain point of view, and maybe become less big, but then you look inside and you see different things. So we have to be very careful when you jump into decisions to treat this with caution and stay in a dialogue with those to understand the figures that you get out of these projects and research, that you actually have understood the situation fully. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, definitely. What I'm wondering, because you are talking about several researchers, how do you come to this, the topics of research? How do you come to these priorities, the choices you make in starting these researches?
There is a legal and a political answer to this. I mean, legally speaking, the role of the European Commission is to take initiative. So it is our right of initiative to propose studies, and to a certain extent we have the freedom to implement and use our budget for this. But of course we also, and here the politics comes in, we are in touch with the representatives of the sport ministries in all the EU member states, and to a certain extent also those in neighboring countries, be it Norway, Iceland, Liechtenstein, but also Turkey, Western Balkans, Eastern Partnership. So we also listen to them, and the reality is that those topics are being discussed. We have an ongoing dialogue with all those countries, with stakeholders, and on that basis we also understand the needs. And then we discuss in the Council, which Council of Sport Ministers, which meets twice a year, what the priorities are, what is important, and in the end of the day the decisions are made basically on collective analysis of needs.
Well, that's interesting, because I think later on at the end of this discussion we will get back to this, because That's very much important how to process further on this debate, especially also on the policy level. Marianne, you are very much on the one hand working on the research side, on the theory, but on the other hand you are very much confronted with all kinds of cases and in a way, maybe closing this gap. Can you give a couple of examples where you have been involved in, where you solved this problem?
Hello, thank you. First of all, thank you for inviting me. It depends how you do the research and also what is your research topic in a way. So I started, for example, in 2013 with match-fixing researches. And then the focus shifted on transgressive behavior. But I work in a sector, I work for the sector sports. So what is really important, I think, when I do research, that the sports sector understands what the facts are and also what they can do with the research. So what we do basically is when I research transgressive behavior, I did in gymnastics. In 2021, the book was published. It's 400 pages, but you can also download the book. So that's also very important to close the gap between the academic world, that it's free and that you can just download a book and read all the recommendations. Also how it's written, that everybody can understand what's in the book. And now we are currently researching the culture of elite sports. That means we are currently researching 22 sports within the Netherlands. It will take us 3 years. And we do surveys, but also we interview people, but also we visit, for example, big events. So, and it's also a multidisciplinary approach. I think that's also really important in sports, but as such, we need a psychological approach. We need, for example, a philosophical approach. We need a criminologist also in our team. Anthropology is also very important. So what we basically do, we build a team, and of course then it will, we hope the research will get on a higher level because there are a lot of discussions going on within the team, but I think also it's very important to help these kinds of meetings and work in the field as well. So for example, I also go to competitions, games, speak a lot with people, also appear on television to explain about the research. And I think from an academic standpoint, it also is really important that you're part of the community and make your work accessible for all.
Yeah, and since you are very much involved in these kind of different sports, if you approach them, how is their response and their cooperation?
It depends how you act. Of course, these are very difficult topics. For example, sexual abuse is not that easy to talk about. Racial abuse is not easy to talk about. So it's very important that you listen to the other side, that you're not aggressive, and that you try to understand everyone's viewpoint. But of course I experience a lot of abuse myself because I speak out on these different topics. That comes with the job, unfortunately. So in a way you try to just get a conversation going and not be afraid. Just ask. People also can say, okay, I don't want to answer. That's up to them. But we live in a difficult world for especially this kind of topics.
Now, I can imagine, for instance, in a financial perspective, or in doping. Let's talk about cycling, for instance. For many, many years, they have done it without any discussion. Now there's a discussion, but still you see that cyclists and team managers and well, everybody who is running around this team is very much putting it.
Yeah, in a way. But in 2007, I started researching doping. I don't know if people know it, but we had the cyclist Rasmussen, who was taken out of the Tour de France. Yeah. And so that was the first research I had to do. But also this is changing. Because in 2007 nobody wanted to talk with me. Absolutely no one. It was, the code of silence was huge. But now, for me as a researcher, I did a research on doping, I think 1.5 years ago, and it was very easy. Because now they trust you, they're more open up. And it's not that it's an easy topic, but as a researcher, for me, it's now much more easy to research these kind of things than before.
Now we are trying to switch to the online participants. I hope the delay is not that big. Severin from Austria, can you maybe? Oh, I see something on the screen. You can't push that away? No? Okay. we see a little bit of block as if you are a criminal. We don't see your complete face, but okay, let's work with that. Can you give? Yes, that's now you're there. Can you give an example? Maybe what you have experienced in Austria with your organization, in talking about the gap between theory and practice.
Hello. First of all, can you give me a quick sign if you understand me? Okay, thank you so much. Then, of course, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very sorry that I couldn't make it to Brussels in person, but that is due to a strike here with the Austrian airlines and the Austrian carrier. If I understood your question correct, which is a little bit weird with the sound, but I think I got your question in a direction to give you a little overview of our experiences here in Austria over the last years with integrity issues, with a very special focus on match fixing, on fighting corruption in sport from a prevention angle, which is the core thing we are doing, is not the work of police in terms of investigating, but it's awareness raising, education and prevention for the ones who are on the pitches or on the football fields in a position to manipulate games, to influence the outcome of games, which is basically the players, referees and the coaches to a certain extent. So there is quite a strong connection with the actual sport, with the individuals doing the sport, getting into their brains and hearts to explain what the consequences of corruption or corrupting sport is. And this is what we are basically doing. Many sports disciplines here in Austria, of course related to the ones who also play a role on the betting markets, which is a special thing when it comes to match fixing that is mostly always related with betting. We are an organization here in Austria, which is an association by law, as I said, specifically dedicated to fight corruption in sport. match fixing, backed up, and this is maybe getting to the heart of your question, backed by the Ministry of Sport, so from a governmental side, by funding, not in a legal connection, but by a certain amount of funding for our budget, and also backed up and supported by the world of sport, which is the federations. We are having approximately 10 sporting federations on board here in this institution, which is like football and handball and tennis. So again, sporting disciplines that play a role on the betting markets. And also we have other stakeholders in our network, which is the betting operators, of course, with their natural interest in the fact that there is no and other sporting organizations like the C and others. All of them are united in the fact that there is no interest in manipulating sports, of course, and this is the reason why they basically back us up. And this might be one model or one case of a classical public-private partnership we built over the last 11 years, where you bring together stakeholders from various perspectives united in one joint goal. Those are the stakeholders here in Austria, and beyond this, there are, of course, I mean, since corruption in sport is not a national thing, but a global thing, international stakeholders, and that is like our friends and partners from the IOC, UEFA, UNODC, and others. But of course, like Floor van Hout said earlier, Erasmus plays a vital role in our work because it gives us the possibility to not only research, but to come up with real solutions to real problems, and that is develop education and for those who need it most, and that is players, young players, and referees, again, everybody who is in the situation or the position to actually manipulate a game. I would leave it here for the moment and give it back to you. Thank you for this first round, and if there are questions, happy to take them. Thank you.
Well, both the same area, maybe on, well, especially match fixing cases. Can you respond to what Severin said?
Sorry, is the question addressed to me? Because the quality of the audio is very bad. So I understand it's addressed to me. So yeah, well, with respect to match fixing, FIFA has a specific unit, a specific department that is dedicated to match fixing. Of course, FIFA, as any international sports organization or any international or any sports organization in general, has limited investigative powers. So what FIFA is doing is to build a network of cooperations with state authorities and international authorities such as Interpol, Europol, etc. What is interesting with respect to concern being confronted to other football organizations is that at the end of the day, the direct competence of FIFA is quite limited because we're competent only for competitions organized.
Very low. Your volume is very low. We can't hear you very well.
Can you hear me better now?
Yes, now it's a little bit better.
Yeah, I basically think I'm too yelled because I don't know what's the technical issue, but I will try to speak louder. No, what I was saying is that FIFA has received competence in many cases, since the matches organized by FIFA are not that much compared to other football organizations. Nonetheless, what FIFA is constantly trying to do is not only to build a strong network of cooperation with state authorities, because their intervention is often crucial in order to discover breaches related to match fixing. But what FIFA is also doing is investing a lot of time and energies in preventive actions. Therefore, constant education at national level. Uh, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Sorry.
Jacques, the audio quality is very low because we have also a very terrible echo here. So we have to push back the volume level, and then we cannot hear you very well. So maybe, we should switch to Severin again, because I'm afraid this is not going to work very well. Too bad, but thank you very much for being prepared to answer. And maybe if the quality is a little bit better next in the next couple of minutes, maybe we can return. But let's go back to Severin. Severin, if you talk about match fixing, it is also a very important topic is awareness. My experience is that lots of people are not so much aware of if they do things very wrong. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think you have the same problem with me, do you? Sorry.
Enough awareness. Let me be clear on that one. With the coaches who are working now in my team and also the athletes, they're very aware. Definitely what happened the last couple of years. So that's not the issue, I think. The challenge is to connect with each other. There are different items to have a follow up. First of all, I think it's also important to talk about the positive items. Now, it's definitely in gymnastics too much on the negative side. So only the media and external people are very focused on the negative items and not even on the results. So that's first of all the first thing, to don't balance the things we have to work on, but also what's happening in a good way. That it's not too negative for the coaches, but also for the athletes, because at the end, otherwise, you get an attitude where everyone is afraid, and I'm sure you're not making the right decisions on that moment when everyone is afraid or panicking to do something maybe wrong. That's not the right way to improve. Another item is important, and that's something we upgraded a lot. Definitely before I returned, I came in gymnastics. Is more the follow up on physical. How is an athlete? Because, for example, in the sports I'm working now, they were training a lot. They do a lot of hours. It's a high impact sport. Um, to have a good follow up, how is the body now? Is it ready for a next training session? Is it ready for this competition period? And it's not only the medical stuff or as a follow-up, but also the athlete who's not afraid, or who has that some moments to talk about how he or she is feeling. And it's also a learning process. When they're 12 years old, it's always good. They always can go, no problem. When they're 20 years old, they're already getting there. And it's a long journey. When they're 20 now and they never did it for 10 years, again, we cannot fix it in one day. So it's a long journey, but that's the two items to follow up. It's actually to balance the difficult items that are inside high performance sports. It's high performance, it's not just sports. There are tough moments, there are very nice moments, and to balance those two, but also to have a follow-up in the physical behavior or well-being. How do you feel today? But also to have some moments to have clear data. Okay, this athlete has to rest. Because training hard, that's the easy part, but taking care of your body, that's something we're working a lot with the athletes, but also the coaching stuff. That's the difficult part in high performance. Everyone can train a lot of hours, do a lot of investment, but the time outside the training, that's something else to take care of your body. And that are two items we're working every day on, and reflect, asking questions to improve ourselves every day. You're never done. You can't be the best. It's never done, but the mindset should be, and that's something we're upgrading now. Every day, one step better.
But this is very specific between coach and athlete. Can you put it on a higher level? What could be done there? Talking about.
It's my job then.
Sorry?
That's my job then, as a high performance manager. That's also the reason why I'm almost every day, unlucky not today, in the training area, so I can do the follow-up. Okay, what are the needs of athletes and coaches and the staff, so I can make it possible together with the management, but also together with the government, to really focus on some items. And because everything we do also has a cost, that we go in the right direction, but also to have a nice follow-up, to have external people visiting in different periods to make clear, is this the right thing we're doing? Because it's very difficult to judge your own work. So we're hiring more people, or asking the government more people to really check on, okay, is this the right way we're going now? Because judging your own work is not the best way. So there are two items we're doing more and more together with, of course, the government, because we're really involved with them to have.
Do you think, because this is on a national level, would it make sense to put it on an international level?
I think in gymnastics, this topic of ethical is really one topic when we're in a competition, or we talk a lot about these items. And it's also sharing is caring. Okay, what are you doing? How are you improving? It's in the small items. It's not in the big things. To have a discussion. Okay, what are you doing? And learning from each other to improve the level, because we're all in this same box, let's say, and we can learn a lot from each other. And these are really good moments to have one-on-one moments, or in group, to learn from each other, to upgrade. But I'm sure everyone is aware which direction we should go, and we are going.
Marjan, in these different kind of sports, you have been very active in research and fixing the problems. These are problems which are mainly also on an international level discussed. What do you think can be done? What should be done to put this on an international level?
Oh, there are so many things I think of. First of all, I'd like to comment on the topic of awareness. Is that okay?
Yes,
yeah?
yes, sure.
I think when you start at a really young age, for example, 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, I think the danger is of normalizing transgressive behavior. And what we see in research, that, for example, weight issues when it comes to gymnastics or other sports are a very tough topic to deal with. So the other thing is, so you're really young, and so your life is basically only sports. So how do you know what is normal and what is not normal? Fear can be normal, weight issues can be normal, shouting at you can be normal, feeling always alone can be normal. So I think we should talk about these kind of topics when it comes to awareness, that young children also experience other situations, go to school, lead a relatively more normal life. So that's what I think of awareness. Other topics I think are that we need to discuss is, for example, unconscious bias when it comes, for example, on racial topics. And we are not aware of that enough, I think. So when it comes to awareness, we have a long way to go. The other thing is
Can you give some examples of these racial questions?
Oh, for example, there has been research done in the Netherlands about how the sports commentators, what they say about black people and what they say about white players. So, and there's a huge difference. So everybody who can read Dutch, also you can download these topics. So I think we need to discuss these kind of things also. But also have female sports, male sports, and there is still male masculinity within the football world. So toxic male masculinity I talk about. So we need to become aware of these kind of things, and there are researches going on these topics, so we need to talk about these. And the other thing is what international federations can do. If you, for example, and now we're talking about gymnastics, but let's talk, for example, about skateboarding. That's now an Olympic sport. You can perform at the Olympics at a really, really young age, 13, 14 years, 15 years. We have the examples, now 16 when it comes to gymnastics. That means you need to start really, really young. So if you raise the age you can perform at an Olympic level, then you get a different sport. So these are the topics we need to talk about. But I talked, for example, with other national federations in gymnastics, and we already raised the age when you for the performance. But still, 16 is very, very young. You still need to start at 7, otherwise you're too late. So this is when it comes to the international federations, but of course also we have to look in the financial side, what Professor Yves also already told about. When it comes to football, the financial situations are, if you are a top player, but we have not that many top players. I was a board member in Ajax. From the 400 young children, only one will make it. But all the parents think they have this one child. So when it comes to awareness, also the parents need to be much more involved and much more realistic. And I think this is also a topic. They always point at the other parents, but they have to point at themselves. When it comes to gymnastics, when you see, I have visited many, many families, and when I see this young child who is 14, 15 years old, and I see her sisters and brothers, and she is that small, that tiny, weighing that less, and not, even so shy to speak with me. And I'm the researcher, but then I think, you are the parent. Where are you? What are you doing? So I think when we can make a change, when also all these parents who think they have now the new Messi also look at themselves. So when it comes to awareness, we have still a long, long way to go.
Floor, if we're talking about awareness, we saw in the book and in the examples from Eve, something has to be done. Then people are aware. Then measurements will be taken. And there are many different stakeholders in this area, many different target groups to put the awareness on. If you look from your position, can you define from your perspective what kind of stakeholders, what kind of target groups should be included if you talk about awareness?
Something that the previous speakers have addressed, that this is a job for
there should be more,
everyone. What we have at European level, we have advantages and we have challenges. And the challenge would be that is for us it's very hard, let's be honest, impossible to talk to each individual coach that there is in Europe. There are far too many, and also for us it's very hard to reach out because we do not have the direct contacts with all those individuals. So our added value is working with multipliers. But of course, where we can be strong is we can actually identify good practices in one country and encourage that they are being applied elsewhere. Because everybody, probably to one extent or the other, is facing these issues. As I said, these are international, these are not linked to national contexts, they happen everywhere. And of course, different solutions are being found in different contexts by different federations. But in order to make use of this collective learning, this needs to be organized and structured. It can be good to put people in a room and talk, but it can be far better if you actually prepare this to studies, to data, and give everybody the chance to look at what this means. And on that basis make recommendations. So we had worked, for instance, on expert groups on safe sport, focusing mainly on children and child protection, but also coaches, because coaches are very key in this, putting out guidelines for coach education. So we're trying to kind of level up to extract good lessons and based on that come with recommendations. And then the challenge is to make sure those recommendations go back to the grassroots. And of course that again, and as Marjan said earlier, you need to then transpose again the language into easy language that people can understand. What we also find that in order to get this, we need to translate. We cannot assume that everybody speaks English or even if they do, that they're ready to read European documents. This is not for granted. So again, we have to rely very much on national federations to make those messages spread. Sport is very good in that because of the sport model, there is a pyramid. There is always an affiliation of a club to a regional national sport federation, international federation. There are the Olympic movement. So there are structures that actually enable to have information flow from grassroots to top and back. So that is actually something that works very well. But it's also very difficult to find the extent of who you need to reach to come back to the point, who are the stakeholders. Because I'm also thinking, we talk about coaches, obvious, the clubs. You see nowadays, for instance, in Belgium, there are more and more safety officers being appointed, or even it becomes obligatory in football, I think. So these are very good examples, for instance, that could be spread to other countries where this is not yet happening. But it's also important to look at the framework. For instance, what are the rights of athletes in this? Because once we know something isn't right, what can they do? Maybe they can quit. But then they have to give up their aspirations. So maybe there should also be ways of being able to address to an ombudsman or to go to, actually also to the police in case of sexual abuse. That's a crime, so that should be also working with police officers to make sure that these things are properly investigated and also brought to the court. But again, also think about education. As Maria mentioned, education, but we see that there is always a lot of challenges to have athletes follow both education and doing their elite sport, so that in case they do not reach the top, or I mean, eventually all sports careers come to an end, and then what happens? I mean, some may end up in the media as a commentator or as a coach, but the large majority will also go back and having to start again. And what has happened? Do they have had the chance to study? So that is also a target audience looking at the education system. So it is actually a very collective effort, and the awareness is probably not always there. Because when we hear, I work in the Department for Education, Youth, Sport and Culture. In education, we talk very much about disadvantaged learners, and there's a lot of focus on including. But for making the case for top athletes, this is much harder, because the perception generally would be like, these people earn a lot of money, they're very cool, they're very resilient, they will be fine. And of course, that is not the full reality either. So there's a lot of work indeed to do.
I saw Yves was very much eager to comment on what you're saying or question.
Well, I just wanted to say that in my case, I give that example, I published my first research on sexual abuse in 2003. But we have had measures only in Belgium, and I think also in other countries it was the same thing, that we had to wait for the scandal of our bishop in 2010 to bring awareness on the problem in public opinion and in the government and the structures. So it's a gap of several years. Another thing I wanted to say is that when we talk on solutions, immediately there's education that comes here. But we never reach the management level, the structural level. And that's also some gap and some, we have to reach the management level to put something in work. Yeah? And another thing is that if you see the changes in sport structures over the last decennia, the most important changes have been enforced to the sport sector. And there was no discussion on that inside. So we miss discussions between sport managers and between the sport structures, and not always think immediately on education. No? It's necessary, and I agree with that, but we miss the management level. I had discussions with football managers on my book, and I presented them, and the reaction was, well, we have other worries. We have financial worries, we have organization worries, and do what you want to do with the trainers, with the parents and so on, but we have other things to do. So there's something missing in the whole system, in my view. We don't reach them.
There are several organizations like IOC, FIFA, they have all their standards. Do you think, because in my opinion, if you have these organizations all together, they all stand for their own thing. Will there be a time that they will come to an agreement on several topics, or will they go individually? That would be the question then in this case also. Because you can put it on a higher level. It is exactly what you're saying. You can go to to the management level, but everybody has his own feeling and everybody wants to do it in his own perspective. Even maybe to neglect that it's there because they have other purposes for this matter.
Well, take the example of match fixing. The topic is coming in discussion now only in Belgium because we had the law enforcement find something of some rotten apples, they say, to bring to course. And then, only then, the sector was in movement, not before. So this maybe too many times from outside that the discussion is going on in sport.
Yeah, I agree on this. What we see, for example, corruption in sport basically started to become a discussion within Europe because of the United States acting on the corruption of UEFA and FIFA. So, and also other topics were raised, for example, by journalists and not by the sports community itself. So we need, for example, the journalists. They were also the ones talking about match fixing and researching. And I'm really happy that we don't only have now more academics in the field of sports, but also more journalists who are not only talking about the game of the last week or the last day, but also about they're researching now more also these kind of topics. But I think there's also a change in the research of gymnastics. I was invited by the Ministry of Sport, and for me as a researcher, it was the first time that all the recommendations were implemented. Not one or two, what sometimes happens, but all the recommendations were implemented by the Gymnastic Federation. And that's a novum, that's new. So I think there is a change going on, but still, and I like to address this issue too, these are monopolists. There is only one international federation in every kind of sports. We have killed all the other monopolies in energy, in water, in you name it. But now we have only these monopolists. And they have a lot of power. And when it comes to power, they don't want to share. And when it comes to power, there's always an abuse of power. And within the system, it's not democratic enough to change it. And I think sometimes we need, for example, more legal cases like Bosman. But we also know what happened to Bosman. The sports world didn't like him that much. So for me, as an academic, I think also the players, the athletes, need to address issues. But most of the time they will only do this after their career. And that's also one of the difficulties in this.
Just another thing, I said that I read the book from different perspectives. The last one was as a fan, as a lover of sports. That I question sometimes, what do I see? Do I see competition, or do you see an agreement between competitors? Do you think the public opinion is strong enough at the moment to deal with this? Or are we so silent because we love to see, for instance, maybe a new Euro League with only the big teams with the big money, or the big money in the Formula One sports? Or
I think there is a change going on. The fact that you are now raising these questions You didn't raise these questions 15 years ago, maybe even not 10 years ago, I think. Yeah, these are the new questions, and change, it's changing, but there is a but. We talk about Qatar, we talk about all these human rights issues, but the moment the World Championship is there, we talk about the game and a competition. But the laws in Qatar did change a bit through sport. So it also has an effect. We talk about all these human rights. We didn't talk about these rights 10 to 15 years ago. We talk about. So there is a change going on, but not as fast as we wanted.
Yeah. Let's for instance give an example in Spain, Barcelona, Real Madrid. Lots of money. It has been discussed for many years about financial fair play. Now again with a referee maybe having, it has to be proven, but maybe having received some money from his company to influence who? Referees? Lots of discussion which you can have an opinion of. But still we are supporting Barcelona because it's a great club and we watch the match.
Yeah, but what we have noticed, for example, in doping issues, there were less spectators. And when it comes to match fixing and you will visit, for example, a competition in Croatia or Serbia, all the people know of which match is fixed and which is not. So there are less people who are watching. And then there will be a change. So maybe we could, I don't know, still there is a lot of money going around in sport. But maybe there will be a change that we will also watch other sports because they're more interesting, because we believe what we see is the game and not match fixing. So when it comes to doping, we have seen a drop down in the spectators.
Is it normal that gambling companies, for example, own a football club? On that level, we are discussing to less on that level. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that's the biggest, the most important football clubs are, but the owners there were Americans or are Russians or are sheikhs in Europe. So can we do nothing about it? Or what are the regulations here? Yeah?
In Germany it's changing because there are rules and regulations that you cannot own as a foreign company, for example. I think you need to have 51% in the country itself. So there are best practices. And I think also in the Netherlands we are talking about these kinds of rules and regulations because we have seen that some clubs were owned by criminals. So also there's a change and you can do a lot with rules and regulations. And what we see in the Netherlands before, it was always only self-regulation. But now, for example, my research is financed by the Ministry of Sport, but we are now also talking about more laws, more regulation, maybe even an authority in sports. So also that's changing.
Will there be a role for the EU in the perspective of regulations? Can the EU play a role there?
Interesting question. As the treaties are, currently there is no competence for sport proper. So our role is based on Article 165, which is a supportive competence. So what we can do is encourage dialogue, finance projects, share good practices, and put things on the agenda, but we don't have legislative power. So this hasn't been given to us in sport. However, of course, sport organizations, like anyone else, have to abide to other EU law, EU legislation, such as competition policy, employment policy, and within those sectors there are colleagues in the European Commission who are not working in the sport unit, but who are working on sport with a perspective on employment or competition law or other. So you can regret or not whether there is not a single concentrated point, but perhaps that is not the most important, how we are organized internally. But it's not the same, of course, as the issues being raised about regulatory affairs in sport or other. That in Germany and in the UK they have also put on the table a new proposal for regulation in football, notably. The question is interesting because there are some voices speaking up in the recent months and years that it would be good to have that. This is not something we have seen before. As usually it would be Europe stay off, and especially in sport there is the autonomy, so don't mix. But this is also changing. So we do see that there is an interest to some even dare to dream that we should have regulation, but there is also an interest and a support for tackling some of those issues together. If we cannot regulate them to law, that at least we can try to align the positions of the ministers of sport of different countries and stay in a dialogue with the big sport organizations. We have arrangement for cooperation with UEFA and with the European Olympic Committees. And if we cannot impose, we can at least discuss things. And I think thanks also for making the point that things are changing. So it's not necessarily always by law that you can change things, because law, it needs enforcement, it needs investigation, it needs people to talk. But at the same time, of course, if the spectators are disappearing, then some things are also happening. So transparency can also be very important. And creating this environment where people can speak and can discuss this can also already make big movements. And not to say that maybe you don't need regulation, but it's not the only solution. Let's say if we say we cannot regulate, that we feel we're powerless, we can definitely create influence by putting things on the agenda and by encouraging and also showing what can be done.
I have another example. I organized a congress in the preparation of the FIFA World Cup 2010. We organized that in 2008 before. But we couldn't have insight nor in the contract nor in the tender procedures whatsoever. If you try, you don't get it. So there's no transparency on that level. Another thing is, in the Olympic Games, they are asking to the athletes to have an oath and to promise sportsmanship and so on. But they don't ask that to the sponsors, neither to the organizing country. So it's a bit hypocrite. So why do we ask to hold on the Olympic values only by the athletes and the referees? So that's why we had the difficulties in Qatar now, yeah, in conflict with human rights. So we don't reach who is controlling on that level. It's a global level. It's not Europe. It's not the United Nations neither. They do what they want.
Well, we are almost coming to a conclusion. Um, still, I want to give him a present about the startup of the discussion. What can we do? There are so many things discussed today, different things, different topics, different problems. What can we do, at least for a start, to bring up a central discussion on that one, and as Yves said, on a global level? Do you have any ideas? Ruben?
And I made a lot of notes today, so that's also a positive item. Maybe an interesting one that's for me, okay, for me there are now 4 types of people in, let's call, the sport system. And I want to know a little bit more specific for my world. Who is successful or happy inside the system? Because I'm asking a lot, are you happy? But you also can happy or successful. Let that be open. But who is in the system? Then you have people who are not happy or not successful in the system. It's possible to have athletes who are not successful at the highest level, but they're in the team. Then you have another group. Third group for me is they're successful, but they're outside the system. Sometimes in some sports it's possible, but some sports it's more challenging. Like in gymnastics, more challenging to be outside the system of federation to be successful. And then the fourth group, number 4, is you're not successful or you're unhappy and outside the system. Because that last one is the one that I heard the most last couple of years. But I think the 4 of them are a good way, okay, how is the system working now to have those 4 people as input, to have an overview, to have a clear overview, because when you only ask one group, I'm not sure that's the right perspective. These are 4 groups I will ask to evaluate my own system with the team.
Floor.
I would also like to stress the importance of looking forward and looking backward, because we have been talking about studies and assessing and reacting to certain problems, and they were only being addressed when an issue appeared or somebody really came out with an evil story. But when we look into the topic, actually, I think there is already, by the time we address, there are also new things coming up. Because we haven't really discussed social media here, which of course are very easy to declare things and put things on the agenda, but they also have come with a lot of new pressure, because there's a lot of online harassment and people are being maybe pushed out because they get constant criticism on internet. And at the same time, the sponsors or clubs are struggling with the freedom they want to give the athletes to be in the public or sometimes even to defend themselves. We also see that maybe in years of relative peace, the geopolitics have returned to the agenda, and actually a big topic today is who can or cannot be in a sport event and representing your country and or not. We all know very well what is happening in today also with the decisions to take on Russian and Belarusian athletes in the Olympics, but also in other. So these things actually come with new problems, but for us it's also important is to keep that perspective. So, and this is also a role we can play at an EU level, is to give that wider helicopter view. I started saying we have a helicopter view, and I think part of having that view is also looking how these rights and situations are evolving. So I may take the opportunity to say that we are very close to launching a new study on athletes' rights that looks exactly at those things in what are the rights of athletes when it comes to participation in international competitions. What is the impact of social media on this? How are these represented in the current system? Is this enough or not? And what is the effect on the athletes in terms of well-being? And we hope to map out so that while those who are actually implementing the challenges of today, we can also serve and give input, and that these discussions remain relevant also in the future.
That's a very clear question.
Because there's so much going. There is so much going on, and at this moment the world is changing. We talk about all these human rights issues, sexual abuse, racial abuse, all kinds of topics. We see a clash. We see a clash between the younger people and older people. We see a clash between cultures. We see a clash on social media, threats even. We see a polarized world. So we see a lot of polarization. But I have hope because there are at this moment so many clashes that it will turn out fine in the end. We need this to set a few steps further. But at this moment, it's a lot. And I hope that the ones in power, that we find a way that also the athletes get a voice and the younger people get a voice. And then I think these power structures will get more in balance. And we need research and researchers and people like Yves. Thank you.
But in the beginning, I started by saying that in this book, what Yves published, there are so many topics that we can discuss.
Yes.
This is exactly what you're referring to this. But I also questioned, can we come to a more general discussion where we can include, well, the most important problems.
It's all about power. It's about financial power. It's about power. Break the monopolies.
Well, that's it. It's financial power. And those guys, they take the initiative. This week in Belgium, there was, forbidden to make promotion of the gambling companies on T-shirts and whatever, football clubs. Yeah. The first reaction was alarming from the football sector. Well, you are taking our money away, yeah? So we cannot function anymore. Instead of gradually discussing and, okay, it's the higher good, that's proposed by the government, so give us time to adapt and so on. But the first reaction was no way. So the sport management and it's a lot of money at stake. And it's very difficult to make changes in that area.
But if it's all about financial power, there's something said in this conclusion. Because it almost looked like this is the end because of the financial power.
Walter, I did not participate in the debate voluntarily, which was very difficult for me, I have to admit.
I know.
But I think one thing I would like to add at the end, we discussed about many stakeholders, but I believe one of the relevant stakeholders is also the kind of associations like Panathlon, because they also bring, the debate forward. It's not only looking back, it's forward. They say, we need to bring people around the table. We need to have transparency to discuss those kind of things. And that has been successful. I think that one of the biggest successes of Panathlon has been the Charter of the Rights of Children, which I think we can be very proud of, because that charter, which was adopted actually in Belgium, was adopted in the small city of Ghent, is a charter that in the meantime has been endorsed by most of the international federations. And it means at least it does say that children in sport have special rights. The right to be a child, first of all, I think it's important. So I believe that in the debate, we need indeed to say, well, among the stakeholders, or associations like Panathlon, which can organize debates, which have the right, because they are independent, to put some challenges forward. So I think that we need to mention that as well. And to conclude about, I did like very much what Floor was saying. Although Europe and the European Union has a limited role, it has a role. Because, originally when I was studying European law, there was no chapter where sport was mentioned. Nobody was even considering that sport could be part of the broader concept of the union that we are living in today. Today it is a very important chapter. And there is a commissioner even in charge of that, which I think is also very important to say. So there is a certain power, and power is not always the direct power to regulate. It's sometimes the soft power, it's the power to discuss, the power of dialogue. But it's also because the union has been developing in certain ways, and you say financial power. Let me add one thing, because we talk about competition law, other areas that are important. Today we see the European Union coming up with corporate sustainability reporting rules. We see the union coming up with a taxonomy where they say, we need to, as financial institutions, to be aware that certain things we can no longer do. And if you look at, these kind of corporate sustainability rules, they have the guidelines that have been developed in the meantime that the Commission is looking into. They are addressing questions of social rights, of human rights. They are talking about, I would say even the Belgian presidency will talk about toxic leadership and mental health in workplace. I think all of that is also the result of the work that the European Union has been doing. So I believe that, the pain is there. The joy is that, we have something promising. There is a future. And the future is, in my view, positive. And I think, giving a positive note to that, I don't believe that, we need to be pessimistic. Because we have seen achievements, even if achievements are step by step, we've seen achievements. And I believe organizations of Panathlon can play an important role to help these achievements to be identified and to be discussed.
Can we then address this as the final conclusion?
That's up to you.
I will. Then thank you very much for your participation in this very interesting and very important discussion. I would like also to thank Jacques and Severin, who are, I guess, still there online, listening at least to us, to thank for their participation. Unfortunately, not being able to give the best input because of the situation. But thank you very much. Maybe there's some room for questions.
Thank you very much. I was thank you very much for all the input that we have. I was very also impressed by Flora, what you have said. I think we underestimate also what a cross-communication can be for the Erasmus Plus projects. We are involved with Panathlon, with several of it. And the first time I said, okay, is this a busy therapy or something? I'm also a critical person like our mentor Yves, and I think very important is to see how important Erasmus Plus projects are, because you have different, let's say, different scopes from people and stakeholders. It's not the same line. It's really across from everywhere and from every level, and that's what I like very much. When you see the outcome, it can take a time to go, but after you see some results, very little ones or very big ones. And that's why, again, we have Panathlon, we have other organizations, of course, also. And the last thing I want to say, I have the chance to be in the commission of the European Olympic Committee, EU and international relations. They are working on the same topics. And that's the cross, the cross communication that can be done with the Olympic, with in fact the stakeholders or the monopolists, if we can say like that. There is no problem to say, and to see that you can find some solution.
Hello, good morning. First of all, my name is Tiago Guilherme from ENGSO Youth, the youth body of the European Sports NGO. First of all, thank you to Panathlon International for organizing such an important event, and thank you to Professor Yves for the presentation of the book. I'm happy to say that we've been working towards bridging this gap between the research and the practice. It is very interesting to see the development of the research of Professor Yves and how it will come up to the importance of safeguarding children and young people, which is also very much in line with some of the findings of the Eurobarometer on sport and youth since the very beginning of the years 2000, which increasingly show us that young people are the biggest segment practicing sports in our societies, but also the Eurobarometers on youth participation, which constantly show us that sports clubs are the main space for our young people's participation. This to say, I'm very happy again that we ENGSO Youth, alongside several partners, have been working towards bridging this gap, and especially through an Erasmus Plus funded project, which actually kick-started last year during the European Week of Sport. It is the Young Integrity Ambassadors program, and we've been developing the program, and we had a training course with 36 young ambassadors that are now within this training course. They were initiated to the top of sports integrity, very much well presented by Paul, to which I thank you for that, but also included inclusion, included communication, the fact of raising awareness and the importance of it, and it had an open mic session where the young ambassadors could showcase their realities. And we have several different perspectives. Also, the young ambassadors came from all over Europe, from the importance of trying to get more young people's participation in sports governance, but also from several risks associated with the practice of sport, such as harassment, racism, and so on and so forth. This to lay the foundations for my question for Professor Yves, but of course for the distinguished guests, if they want to intervene, I'll be very happy to hear from you. Given all these challenges that might threaten sports integrity, if you had to pick one, what would it be? And what would be your main message to these young ambassadors that are now going for the development and the dissemination of their activities within their local realities? Thank you so much.
Well, as I already said, there are so many problems, and we have mentioned a few, and it's impossible to work out a solution separately from one another. So that's why I suggested a comprehensive approach to deal with all, and to have one structure to manage different aberrations and problems. And the second thing I want to say, we don't make, or we will not make progress until we reach the management level. Of course, we have to reach all levels, but when the highest levels are not discussing appropriate structures and ways to manage, then it will be only a few changes in the margin, in my view. So that's why I think we have to reach that level and to let them open discussions on their own, because they know on that level better what to do than we know, yeah? From the outside. From the inside, they have to discuss, yeah? And to come to some solutions. And that's why it's a pity that we didn't hear Severin a bit more, because on the topic match fixing, he reached the management level in Austria. But he was eager to know how he did it. Yeah? So, yeah, and it works very well there. Yeah? And they use now that forum to also address the other problems. So that's the major issue we have to reach, in my view.
Thank you. Paul Standaert from Panathlon, Belgium. It's a question from mevrouw Van Hout. We talked just earlier about I'm not quite sure if the term is correct, the welfare officer in a sports organization. Welfare is maybe not the just title. We have another title in the sports in Flanders, but I think we all catch the message. These welfare officers today, most of the clubs and federations try to recruit them in the best way possible, taking in account the profiles. But much of the time, these persons are already working within that sport federation or within that club. Maybe at the EU level, there could be some promotion of this to work on independent welfare panels, independent from the sports organization. Probably funded by the sports organization, but completely independent experts that are at the service of these young athletes, parents and others, but are not on the authority. It could be maybe something that could be promoted by, or I am dreaming.
Well, of course, I mean, in the work that we do, we have done a joint project with the Council of Europe on this topic, and I think there's a number of recommendations there. And of course, these need to be shared and also further discussed, because maybe indeed we need to not just sit back and say, "Done, this work is over," and we have to look at different topics. So keep the conversation going, and indeed, in a couple of weeks, we have the annual sport forum, and integrity will be on the agenda. So maybe this is also the occasion to come to the forum and repose the question also there when more people will be in the audience. But what made me also reflect your question is something completely different but still important. Because we come out of a pandemic of around 3 years that have really damaged the sport sector seriously. And what mostly happened in a negative sense are two things. I mean, they have lost money and they have lost volunteers. So unfortunately, coming with increasing demands, you have to it is not only safety officers or confidence persons, it's also equality. I mean, we have issued a report on gender equality last year, and one of the wishes was also that somebody should be appointed. And so what we see is that we do raise the bar for clubs to say you have to have a way of handling abuse, and you know, serious abuse is one thing, but also the constant pressure that parents put on their children, this is pretty widespread. So this is an issue for all the clubs. We have to make sure that there are enough women in active roles in those clubs, and we have to make sure there is a green policy, because there's a lot of challenges. And we're asking these things on clubs at a time when they say we are not only struggling with the financial losses we suffered during the pandemic, but also some of our capacity is reduced. And recently we also in discussions on what to do in the recovery. They said it's not only this, but there are staff shortages in many sectors and also in sport. So it's actually difficult to attract people. So we also have to look into their realities. It's like, how can we actually support and cope with all those things against those circumstances that the world hasn't necessarily become an easier place. So it's maybe opening a different chapter, which isn't helpful when you try to conclude on a panel. But I think it's also to see those challenges and see how we can actually then also sit together and reflect like what can be done and how to do it, given also the constraints that are there, provided there is goodwill.
One last question, maybe. No? Then I would like to give the final word to Yves, please.
Just to thank everyone here, the participants and also the debaters. But, well, my conclusion is a bit that we still have a long way to go. It's a long way to Tipperary. It's the beginning. We have to be patient. And well, the same thing. In 2002, I started with publish on this thing, and it's nowadays only, we are 2022, the implementation and the rollout on sexual abuse is fully. So it lasted 20 years to change that. So think about match fixing. That will take also another 20 years. And I dare not to think about the financial structures. That will take maybe longer than that. So, well, but you have to start anyway. And we have started maybe today with the start of a change on the long term, on the long run. Thank you very much for being here.
I think Paul gives me the message that there is something else that we are still having. Thank you for attending this, and there is a small lunch bowl that is available just outside, and you're kindly invited to join us. And already start to talk about the next book of Yves. He says 10, 20 years of now. Okay, we will see. Thank you.
Heeft u nog tijd voor een broodje met ons? Heeft u nog tijd voor een broodje met ons? Ruben, jij kunt ook nog iets...